But
We'll throw up.
I'm going to talk about Michigan today. Mostly because we live in Michigan, and the people that come through the front door kind of view Michigan as a novelty place, at least when it comes to a guest. I will talk louder in a moment. On the global market, Michigan doesn't exist. In the States, it barely exists. For the most part, all wine still is California. A smaller extent is Washington and Oregon. Michigan has a great potential to become the next big vineyard and the next big region of the continental U.S. to explode. And there's a couple of reasons why we have such a good setup, and there's also a couple of reasons why we'll always be limited no matter how much focus we put into it. And most of it has to deal with the climate and the soil and how our region came to be. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I also want to kind of talk about why I've been doing wine training classes in the first place and how everyone's been getting out of it. Because I've been trying to do these for beer every week, with the exception of last week, just because of the week that it was. And we're covering short periods. So what we're doing is I'm going to be doing basically an around the world focus. I did a brief a couple months ago, and now what I'm going to do is every week is going to be dedicated to a specific field or a specific category of the world. So today we're going to start in Michigan. I'm going to continue into some of the rest of the U.S. in the next couple of weeks, and we're going to branch out into New Zealand, Australia, and Europe, and all of the following countries that really are responsible for wine. Now, can anyone tell me why I'm doing all of these training classes? No. Anyone else? No, actually, the reason we're doing this is because I'm going to be taking the sommelier test in 3 months, and I have to know how to know about this. So I'm studying myself independently on my own. I'm doing a little bit of review back and forth with a couple of people that I know, but really I'm studying it for my own knowledge. However, learning as much as I am, I feel that it is wasteful for me to just learn it and not impart what I'm learning to you guys. Because Krista is a great example, or Susan's another great example of someone that has increased their beverage sales as a result of these classes. Now, does she know as much as she should? No. Does she know as much as she could? No. What she does know is she knows enough to feel confident when she's talking to a customer at the table, so that when I make a recommendation or I start to talk about something, I don't feel like I'm going to get caught by somebody and say, no, that's wrong, it's really actually this. I don't trust you anymore. And I know everyone around this table has that level of insecurity from time to time when they're talking to a guest about wine or about beer. I know I did it as a server all the time. So these little stints are really our opportunity to get you familiar and comfortable with wine, so that when you go and have a customer that asks you about Bentonville and what type of wines are they best known for, and what's good, and why would you recommend them as a winery, and why are they on the menu, you can at least give a small answer. I don't ever expect anyone to know everything about everything. You know, yesterday as an example, I was chatting with a couple of bartenders, and we started talking about a pairing suggestion that I do all the time, which is ask someone what they enjoy to drink, and from that determine what they might like to drink as wine. You have to have a large knowledge base in your head about what wines you can touch and pair and what pairing flavors you have. And to do that, you have to taste, to be honest, you have to taste tons and tons and tons of wines. Because you can't do it by reading it in a book. You really have to taste it so you understand the flavors. So you can pair light flavors with light flavors.
I had that last night. I had a gentleman who was comfortable with Merlots, and he wanted to try a Syrah. And I steered him away from the South Americans. I said and said there's a cool climate, the Klein. I said, and that's going to be more to your liking because it's a little more subtle in its nature.
And you know, those things happen all the time. So what I want to do is let's start to focus on Michigan. So Zach should be here soon, so I can really get started with the meat and potatoes that I want to talk about today. So, as I mentioned before, Michigan is relatively new to the wine world. They've only been making wine, actual vinifera wine, such as Chardonnay, Riesling, Gewürztraminer. Those types of grapes have only been planted in Michigan since 1974. That's it.
Wow.
They didn't exist before.
I didn't know that.
So we're talking about vinifera grapes that are at their oldest 35, 40 years old. That's the oldest grapevine period. Most wines aren't considered properly aged or robust until they're at least 50 years old. The grape vines are at least 50. Most of the grapes that we use around here are clones. However, there was a wonderful gentleman by the name of Ed O'Keefe. Ed O'Keefe works and owns a winery that you might have heard of before or not, I'm not sure. He owns Chateau Grand Traverse. He decided that hybrids weren't really the way to go, and we really needed to have their own designated vineyard. So he planted Riesling grapes in 1974. And everyone in the wine world said that was the dumbest thing. It was 200 miles farther north than anyone has ever done before. And you know what? Today is the only reason we have wine in the country up here. Period. If it wasn't for him, this would still be imported wine only, and we would have St. Julian flavored wines as our only option for Michigan. Yes. So, we have a lot to thank for Ed. He really did help get, especially Traverse City and Peninsula on the map. Ed O'Keefe, great guy. You want to talk about stories like Green Beret and all kinds of... You get that guy in a room and give him a couple of glasses of wine. He got some more horror stories than you could possibly imagine about his life. Now, he was kind of a visionary in determining that this region would be good for grapes. Everyone already knows at this point, I'd assume, that grapes typically grow really well around the 45th parallel. However, just because you're on the 45th parallel doesn't mean grapes grow well where you live. I'm going to take Minnesota as a great example. Grapes can't grow in Minnesota. It's way too cold. The frosts come way too early into the year, and they get way too bitter. And the actual cold over the winter months doesn't matter for the grapevines. They hibernate, that's fine. It's that they have frost too early and too late into the harvest season. And that affects flowers, which is going to in turn affect the grapes, which means that they can't grow. There are regions in Canada, by the way, that can grow certain grapes because they have a warm climate. So Michigan, in all of the state, we take our plastic thumb, right? And I actually saved myself a step today, and I actually printed a map of it. So we got Michigan. Everyone's familiar with what Michigan looks like. There are two regions in all of Michigan so far that they've been able to find that actually are able to grow grapes for wine. One is what we're all familiar with, which is up here in the peninsulas, Leland on Old Michigan. And there's a reason for that. The other one is way down here in the south, and this is Lake Michigan Shore. There's also another one that's called Fenn Valley as an AVA, and those are the only 4 recognized AVAs currently in the state. However, I'm going to pass this around. All the little red dots you see, those are other wineries that aren't part of AVAs. American Viticultural Area. Or Viticultural Area. Viticultural, I'm sorry. And those are just regions that are recognized as good, ideal growing area. Now, wineries exist all over. However, Michigan has some unique issues with it that are going to make wines very unique. And I talked about this the other day, melanin actually. I mentioned just a little bit about it. So who here remembers history classes in 4th and 5th grade when we talked about Michigan as the subject? Do you remember all those things talking about like the old Indian trails and Sacagawea and all of that? Does anyone remember some of the geography lessons that we learned about Michigan? Okay, what was Michigan 50,000 years ago? Does anyone know?
Ocean.
Thank you. It's an ocean. It was a saltwater ocean about 50,000 years ago. That's why we have Petoskey stones. And that was even millions and millions of years ago. We used to be a huge saltwater and then later a freshwater ocean, which means that for the most part, everything that we're at right now is underwater. Can anyone tell me what type of soil there is at the bottom of the ocean?
Sand.
It's just sand. There's virtually no nutrients to it. It's sandy soil. And in fact, if anyone around here has done any form of excavating or digging or anything for fun, they know that there's about a 1 to 2 foot layer of dirt, if that, and then it's nothing but sand as far down as you want to go afterwards. You can dig 200 feet and you're still getting sand. Because that's all that we really are. We're a huge sand dune with a little bit of rich soil on top from the last few thousand years that have actually had soil. Now, in that same process, we've had another phenomenon that has made our area very unique. Can anyone else tell me something other than Melanie? What else has been really unique to this area other than the fact that we've been in ocean?
Salt line?
No, actually, it has to do with glacialization. We're one of the few areas anywhere in the world that had glaciers cover our entire continent, our entire area at one point. So now the glaciers add a whole other factor to how mineral rich we aren't. Glaciers came down 3 different times throughout the year. This is the most recent one, by the way. There were more severe glacialization attempts in the past. But basically, the glaciers came down, and you can see it everywhere you go. They just kind of came down, and they just slowly scraped all of the soil and all of the nutrients off and scraped it. And if you go down to like Ohio, where the glacier stopped, it's nothing but 30 to 50 feet of thick, mineral-rich mud from all of the nutrients that got scraped out of our region and deposited down there. So that means that we have very little soil. What we do have is scraped clean multiple times, and we're starting really fresh, which means that from a wine world, we get the unique ability to have very crisp, light, delicate wine. That's part of the reason that Riesling grows so well, because Riesling, if you're familiar with the grape, is a very floral grape. It has a lot of aroma already with it, whether we add it or not. It doesn't need soil to let the flavor and the aroma of wine. Other than that, it is delicate, and having a very light, delicate soil lends to a delicate style Riesling, very similar to the mineral-rich minerality that you get in Germany. Even though we don't have any minerals, because we have so little, we're getting a very similar flavor profile, and on a worldwide scale, we're actually making some pretty competitive Rieslings that have won awards worldwide. That's not something many places in the world can say anymore. So let's go a little bit into not just geography, but other influences that have kind of done this. So right now, if we take Michigan, we have a sandy soil with just a little bit of rich minerals up on top, and that's about it. It's very light. We have new, young grape vines that haven't really matured yet. They're still getting there. I'll give them another 30 years and they'll be great. That means that there are certain wines that are going to go wonderfully here, and there's other ones that are going to go great. So, real quick, what wines do you think, other than Riesling, as I already said, what other grapes do you think are going to go great, grow well in this area? Sure, absolutely. Why?
Because it's just like another grape that needs just a rich soil. It's mostly like they're really sweet and got that aroma and flavor.
They actually aren't any sweeter than a Riesling or a Chardonnay or anything. Sweetness really has to do with how long you ferment it. It doesn't actually have to do with the grape itself. Gewürztraminer is a aromatic wood. So again, it thrives in our area because we don't have the minerals, but it has its own aromatics that really lend to it. And because we have so little influence in the grape, it lets the grape really flourish on its own. In general, light grapes are going to do great in our soils. Pinot Noir, Gamay, Nebbiolo, which we haven't even started to plant here, by the way. Sangiovese probably could survive decently well. Sangiovese needs a little warmer climate than we can really accommodate yet. But, you know, those are lighter style grapes, and they're going to blend well with our lighter style soil. Anyone that's had any heavier style heritage wines from Michigan will always notice one thing. It's always lighter body. It's usually tart, and sour, and acid. And it's never got that huge push that you're used to in like a California or even a French wine. And the reason for that is partially the climate, but it's also just because we just don't have the age, nor do we have the soil to really get a huge, robust wine. It's just not possible.
Yeah, cherry wine.
We do have cherry wines. We also have pear wines, apple wines, strawberry wines, raspberry wines, and blueberry wines. Those are all Michigan wines that are made in this area. They're all coming from fruits from the state because we can make a lot of those fruits. Most of the wines aren't very popular now that Vinifera is starting to catch on. Cherry wine being probably the most popular of all of those fruits I just mentioned. Again, even in those styles, they're light, they're airy. You take the northern Michigan cherry and you go and you compare it to Washington cherry, which is the other leading cherry grower in the state. Ours are always crisper. They're lighter. They're not quite as juicy. I go and I eat a Washington cherry, and it's always got that super sweet, rich concentration. You can always tell when one of these local shops around here, one of those booths that are on the side of the road, when they're buying them from somewhere else and just pretending that they're ours, they always taste different. You know, part of that is French, but it is really, our soil does lend some different character in the grape or in the cherry. The other thing that really affects how our grapes are grown is soil, or not soil, I'm sorry, climate. So I searched because there's this great map I found somewhere that actually shows how the climate patterns come across and why the peninsulas are such a great area. Couldn't find it. I did find this little written portion on it, so I'm going to just kind of pass this out so everyone can read it on their own time. But basically, like I said, we're on the 45th parallel, and when we're dealing with these peninsulas, the Old Mission is the one I'm going to focus on a little bit more. It has less wineries, it's smaller, but it has a more consistent growing area than the Leelanau Peninsula does because of its size and its area. It's surrounded on either side by the east and west bay of Traverse City. Each bay is warm, really warm. And so if you're familiar with how bays work, in the spring they're going to be cool because they haven't warmed up yet. And they stay colder longer than the ground does. So the ground starts to warm up, and it starts to heat up on land because you're getting this warm air, and everything starts to pop in the spring and burst forth. The water stays cold. And so the cold water is actually going to, interestingly enough, it's going to keep growth from forming on that peninsula, which means that they can plant the grapes earlier, they can bloom earlier, and it gives them a longer time to be able to grow that Riesling grape. In the winter, as we're getting into the fall, the water is now warmed up from an entire summer worth of sun exposure. So now you have this warm water that, again, is going to do the reverse effect, and it's going to prevent frost because it's too warm for frost to form in that area. So it really shelters both of those two peninsulas. That's why we can have grapes grow this far north. There have been attempts to have grapevines grow in Antrim County, up here by Harbor Springs, a couple of other areas. They all work decently, but not with as much regular and consistent success that the peninsulas do. That's because of the weather patterns of the area. They're just getting constant warm water and warm air in those areas that just help grow. On the whole, though, we're far to the north, so we do have a cool growing climate, which means the only grapes that are really going to grow well are cool grapes. Again, that goes to why we eat Pinot Noir, why Riesling, why Gewürztraminer are all what grapes that grow well in the south. They thrive in those cool climates. So that's just a little hint and backup of where we are as a region, why our grapes are kind of working that way. Let's talk about the 4 AVAs, and I'm going to just talk about them a little bit. The first one I want to talk to is Fenville. Fenville was the oldest region in Michigan that had grapes growing from a hybrid phase. So they're even older than 1974. They're back in the 40s and the 50s when these were being planted, and it wasn't recognized as an AVA for a long time, but this is the one area where they were able to experiment and kind of grow these hybrid grapes and get some sort of wine. It wasn't great, it certainly wasn't popular, but it was a stepping stone. In that area now, Fenville wine is probably the most popular and well-known vineyard in that specific region. There are a couple of other smaller ones. They've since extended it down to North Michigan, or South Michigan Shore, which is basically from Fenville, which is just south of Grand Rapids, before Fenville. From there, all the way south down to Indiana is the rest of North Michigan, or South Michigan Shore. And that's just a consistent, it's a slightly cooler growing climate, so that means white wine grows a little bit easier, where red wine actually is about the only area where white wine grows well so far as Fenville. And those cooler climates led, again, to nice wines. However, the wines that grow down there are mostly Chardonnay, Grigio, Merlot, Cabernet, Pinot Noir. There are some Riesling grapes that grow down there, but they're not as well known as what's grown in Traverse City, and there's a specific region. Really, again, it comes down to the region that they grow. The two AVAs that we're most familiar with are Old Mission Peninsula and Leland. So Old Mission Peninsula is the smallest AVA in the state. It's something like 17 square miles. It's not big. It also only has 7 wineries on it total. However, it has some of the biggest producing wineries and the most popular in the state. It has Chateau Grand Traverse. Everyone's familiar with that. It also has Peninsula Cellars, which is another one we feature here. It has Bryce Estate, which is something I've featured in the past. It also has Two Lads, which if anyone's been there, they might know know Two Lads is a winery. They might not. It's not. It's an up-and-coming vineyard. It's not as popular.
Who's George DeBois?
George DeBois? No. No, George DeBois makes Bourgeois Nougat. There's also Chateau Chantal and Bowers Harbor, as well as Black Star Farms. And those are the extent of all of the vineyards on that entire peninsula. There's no room for anyone else. Black Star Farms is probably the newer up-and-coming one. They're the one that is proving right now that red wines can actually grow this far north. They've had some really great red wine blends and great wine knows the salt. Other than that, everyone kind of has their own specifics on what they're focusing on. Grand Traverse is more of a mass producer, where Peninsula Cellar is really a Riesling type place, so they'll do an award-winning Gewürztraminer. You have Bowers Harbor, and Chateau Chantal, which are both up and coming. They're still kind of figuring out where their place is. You go to both of those wineries, and they just have every wine under the sun, and they're trying to figure out which one's going to be their ideal. They're not quite there yet. Other than that, Bryce Estate really does kind of a sweet style of wine in all their wines. They just kind of like a little bit of sugar and Christmas to it. And then Two Lads is Two Lads, actually, of all of them, is the one that's the most controversial. They're also the ones that have the most eccentricity to them. They're a collaboration of a local guy and a gentleman from South Africa. And they're actually incorporating real wine. They're not trying to make sweet wines. They're not trying to make things that are really appeal. They're trying to make things that just taste good and that can win. I can tell you right now, they blow your socks off. I've been trying to get a hold of wines from them since I tasted it about 2 years ago. Hard as tough to get their wine.
What's controversial about it?
They dabble in wines that aren't necessarily popular. Cabernet Franc is one of the more popular wines. However, Cabernet Franc is not something that you would ever see around here. They make an amazing rosé. They make one of the best Pinot Grigios I've ever tasted. That includes Italy. It's easily the top one. Now, it's not a Pinot Gris, so it's not as robust and rich as like the El Cobe, which we featured in the past, or some of the other Pinot Gris. It is a Pinot Grigio, which means it's tart, it's acidic, it's light, it's refreshing. It still has those golden apple flavors, and it's a wine that I sampled twice and took about 2 bottles home, and I never buy it on wholesale. If I really like it, I'll go and order it by the case at wholesale and save myself some money. I had to have it. So, as far as the other ADA, the last one that I haven't mentioned is the Leelanau Peninsula. The Leelanau Peninsula really doesn't have a lot of well-known vineyards. It has Leelanau Cellars. It has Shady Lane Cellars. Both of those you're probably familiar with. It also has about 30 other vineyards. Of the 30 other vineyards, I could name a few of them, and I'm pretty sure no one here knows them. They're boutique. They're small. Most of them are mom-and-pop farms where it's maybe 20 acres of grapes. Yeah, small. You can go in there, you can ask for a taste, they'll give you the taste of the wine. They're actually where some of the best wines come from, but it's also something that never would get featured in a restaurant because they just don't have the supply or the quantity, nor do they have the desire to do that. But they're the ones that really get to experiment and find better wines. So a couple wines of note as far as wineries and things that are really popular. Most of them we featured here at one point, or at the very least you've probably heard of them. Riesling being one of the most popular grapes, right? In fact, if you come to Michigan, people almost always ask for Michigan Riesling because it's consistent, it is good. People will ask for one of 2 different types of Rieslings always. And you tell me 2 types of Rieslings we always get asked for.
The late harvest?
That's definitely the biggest one. What's the other? The semi-dry. I don't get too many requests for dry, short of people that are actually winos and know what the dry means and know that they're going to like the dry. Now, I've got plenty of people here enjoy a dry wine when I convince them to try it, but not many people come in and request it. As far as Rieslings go, some of the more popular or the more well-known Rieslings to always recommend Chateau Grand Traverse. It just has the name behind it. It's like Behringer. It's becoming the big name around here. They've mass-produced most of them. Shady Lane is obviously the one that we do. They make a decent Riesling. It's semi-sweet. It's crisp. It's a perfect semi-sweet version of a Riesling, what it should be. Peninsula Cellars is another winery that's well known for the Riesling grapes. The other one that I haven't mentioned yet that's really well known for Riesling is Leftfoot Charlie. Now Leftfoot Charlie, again, like Two Lads, is another eccentric person. He basically says, I only want to work with Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, and that's it. Leftfoot Charlie. And Peninsula Cellars. So Leftfoot Charlie focuses basically on dry Riesling, which is another, when he first did it, he was the only one, by the way, with dry Riesling. Since there's been a couple of others. And he has a lot of respect for making classic Riesling in the way Riesling should be, and doing it very well. We featured Leftfoot Charlie in the past. It's like wine that's hard to get a hold of, just like Two Lads. It sells great, it disappears quickly, it's limited release. I'll be happy to get it back on the menu once they finally release 2011 and then 4 more months. But until then, all I can do is talk about it. The other wine that grows really well around here, Pinot Grigio, again, another light wine. Now, there are people that grow both Pinot Grigio and Pinot Gris, which is the same grape, just presented in different styles. Pinot Gris typically are fuller bodied. It's going to be potentially a little sweeter. At the very least, it's going to have a richer, firmer mouthfeel. It's going to have more buttery type characteristics to it. They're usually just trying to make it more Chardonnay-like. Sweet. Pinot Gris can be more sweet. Pinot Grigio is an Italian style. It's palate cleansing by rule. So it's going to be acidic, tart, refreshing, crisp, clean. The two that I can say that are most popular for Pinot Grigio currently, Two Lads, from a cult standpoint. Two Lads is one of the better Pinot Grigios. Black Star Farm also makes a great Pinot Grigio. Again, it's another thing that's been hard to get a hold of. They're actually sold out, and I got to wait for the next vintage to be able to get them. Pinot Gris. So Black Star Farm sells a Pinot Gris, Two Lads sells a Pinot Grigio. Both of them have unique characteristics based on those styles. There's one more white-styled wine that's very popular in this area, and it's one vineyard that I have not mentioned. Anyone tell me what other white wine is incredibly popular? We do have it on our wine list, but it sells like...
Fort Myers.
No, Fort Myers is California.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's Michigan?
Michigan wine.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's not a Riesling, it's a different grape.
It's not Black Star.
It's not Black Star. He is on the Old Michigan, I'm sorry, he's on the Leland, he's not on Old Michigan. And he is responsible for probably more wine sales, with the exception of maybe Chateau Grand Trouvers.
Not Fries?
He has 2 different lines. One is El Mobby, and the other one is M. Lawrence.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Everyone should know him for the sex. So, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what sex is and some of the other things it is. So, Mobby is, again, just like Two Lads, just like Charlie, just like some of the techniques, he's eccentric. He started, if anyone knows any history on Mobby, he started growing wines for sparkling, and no one around here made sparkling, and everyone thought he was crazy. And originally, he made batches that were as often good as they were bad. A lot of his early batches were so bad that you didn't really want to drink them, but he had this kind of you never know what you're going to get type attitude, and people were so in love with it, they go there and they buy out all his wine every single year as he was making it, and you could either get this gold mine of a great wine for almost no money, or you just get this horrible thing, and you just didn't spend much money for it anyway, so it was okay. So he kind of got a cult status. He grew these great, classic, French-styled sparkling wines. The wines that, the Blanc de Blanc that we do by the half bottle was one of his more popular ones. The, I cannot think of it right now.
Cremant?
The Cremant is his classic French style that's consistent now. He's since gotten consistent with it, and he's made some very consistent wines. So El Mobby makes some great sparkling wines. He also has a pale rosé that he makes that's great, that we don't feature here. And what happened is other vineyards around the area tried to do the same thing. They tried to make these sparkling wines. They failed miserably. Can anyone tell me of any other sparkling wine made in Michigan other than Mobby? You're not going to be able to, because there isn't. So what happened is about 15, 20 years ago, they tried to make these. They failed. And now they had all these plants that they planted, all these grapes, and they didn't know what to do with it. So they approached Larry and they said, make some wine for us. And he said, I don't know. So in the meantime, he had some excess, and he made this wine. And he put a little bit of blush coloring, grape skin coloring into it. Called it Sex. Got the licensing for it, which, by the way, took 3 years to even get the licensing for the name Sex, by the way. But he got it. He sold it. It disappeared within, in wine terms, it was something in the range of 50 cases, and he sold out of 50 cases in 2 or 3 weeks.
Branding genius.
Yeah, so it was a branding genius. Everyone wanted it. It flew off the shelves. He went back to all these farmers that had all these extra sparkling grapes and said, yeah, you know what? I'll buy them from you. That's what our Mauby Sex is made of.
He labeled it Sex because it's a brut rosé, so
it is
brut and a rosé
at the same time. Yeah, they kind of got intimate with each other. So it's a brut and a rosé. It is very fruity. It's not sweet. A brut, by definition, is going to be dry. However, it's very popular. People love it. They love the name. They sell it all the time. But if you really get technical, grapes don't come from Larry Mauby's vineyard. They come from other vineyards that he makes. So it is his wine. It is his genius, but it is not his grapes. However, that being said, it's easily my most popular champagne. I sell more of it than anything else. It's a great sparkling to drink. It really
so
is.
at Scooby's, when we were able to get in for the first time, we sold ungodly amount of cases. That's just yes.
It's the name. It really is the name.
People walk in there, I mean, old ladies to young people.
Alright, and then to follow up, the last thing that there really is the reds, and the reds are pretty small at this point. Pinot Noir can be grown in some years are great, other years are horrible. Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, they're all attempted at. Nothing's great yet. Really, the biggest reason is because they're too young. Red wine grapes they're at least 40 to 50 years, and most of them are less than 20. They just need more time to mature. If you drink a red wine right now, a lot of times you're going to get almost taste like chlorophyll or green or just astringent levels. It's just not quite there yet. You know, so these grapes, most of the red wine grapes were planted 15, 20 years ago. They're about our age. So, you know, you think about your 40, go and try a good red wine. It might be pretty good. They're not bad now. They're just not great. What else do I got here? You know, I actually kind of covered most of this stuff. So I don't think we have to go over this. So what I want to do is we kind of continue. We're going to just answer you guys' questions. I want to taste some of the wines that they do have open in the area around local Michigan, and we're going to just kind of talk and identify some of these patterns that we're talking about, which is like crispness. More often you're going to see more acidity because of the soil and the climate. Because it's colder, acid is easier to grow in this area. You're going to see a lack of depth happening, and that's because the grapes are young. They just haven't had time to mature. The vines need more years so that you get more of that depth. You're also going to be looking for styles. You know, as an example, Michigan likes sugar, so we do put a lot of sugar in a lot of our wines. We like to let them ferment partially, leave them residual sugar. Any questions before we go and taste wines? Yeah.
What you just went over, but the question I was wondering is why don't we have house wine?
It's actually a good question. The reason we don't do house wines is because the demand for house wines is, to be honest, few and far between. And who here has ever drank a house wine at a restaurant? Honestly.
I couldn't tell you what it's called.
I was going to say, I've had house wines before. I've tasted house wines before. House wines, traditionally, in most restaurants when you get a house wine, it's the wine that they just open, serve. They usually get it, to be honest, in a 1.5 liter bottle, so it's 2 normal wine bottles. And they just serve it to the masses. It's cheap. You can get it for $4 to $5 a glass usually. And that's an expensive glass. $3 is even more like it. It's $2 chocolate. There's nothing great. There's no name brand behind it. You go to Applebee's, there's a great place. You can get red or white. Which wine would you like? It's red or it's white. They don't even tell you what it is. It doesn't matter. It's wine. It's drinkable. Has alcohol in it, and it kind of makes me feel like I'm a wine. However, here at City Park, just like the beer option, we really don't do a lot with low-tier wine. We really want people to experiment. We want them to enjoy something. We want them to pair food well. We do have low price point options, but they are still considered premier wines. So Tarandina, Cabernet, Chardonnay would be our two lowest price points. They are put on there for a house-like option, but they're still not house. They're still nice bottles of, or nice glasses of wine that are decent and easy to drink, that aren't offensive, that pair well, and won't spoil. You get into a house wine for sheep, that's just not the way that we are. We don't want to identify ourselves as the place to go and get a cheap glass of wine. And we want to show some level of value price. You know, like as an example, the 10 for 10 wines that we feature, I go through, on average, between 5 to 6 tastings before I find one that's suitable enough to be able to put on there. And even then, the wine might not be to my liking. There's been only a few wines in the entire time that I've been tasting wines that are suitable enough to stay on or continuously come back. Tarandina Carmenere is one of the great examples of a wine that's so well received that I'm probably never going to eliminate it from that 10% list. It's very popular, it's easy to drink, it's smooth, it has great balance, it can pair with almost anything on our menu. It's just very versatile. It's a value wine that's a hidden gem. That's one of the things that we try to do. We're not trying to just look for some cheap wine to give to a customer because they want cheap wine. We're trying to look for, this is an incredible value that we found, that we stumbled upon. We want to share it with everybody else. We want people to feel privileged, taken care of, that we're looking for the best interests to make them have the best possible experience. And when we do have those people, like I know you did a week ago, where they don't care about the experience, they don't care about the value, they don't care about the story behind it, all they care about is to spend as little money as possible. Unfortunately, it is that one demographic that I'm never going to really be able to satisfy. And I've had long conversations, not going to change. We're not going to get house wine on there just to satisfy those people who don't want cheap wine. To be honest, Behringer White Zinfandel is an example of something that is a settlement for people that want a cheap glass of wine. Our sales of Behringer White Zinfandel in the last 6 months have dropped 80%. So it tells me that customers don't want it, and it also tells me that you guys, as a whole, recognize that that is not something to be anything more than a compromise when you can't find anything better for the guest. There will always be people that will want it, that won't change. But the fact that you're letting people explore and find something that they might like better is great.
Well, for a lot of people, it's desirable. You can point them in that direction.
Exactly. And a person that's looking for a cheap glass like that, you really, I mean, you're at that option where you just have to say, I don't really have a great option for you. I have these wines, they're our lowest price point. Will they work? And if they just say no, then they say no. And it's a hard thing to read into. You know, that guy didn't even want to talk to you about it. I wouldn't hold that one against you.
Right, no.
But, I mean,
I wasn't even really specifically just talking
it's
about
just, you get those people that want to be cheap, and you just got to explain to them that that's not the route to go if that's what you want to do. If you want to be cheap, you need to get something. Just go get a glass of Miller Lite. You're not going to spend much more. Go get a bottle of PBR. Go get a vodka and tonic. Go get something that's $2 or $3 if that's all you want to spend. That's fine. We do have those options, but wine has always been, we are the Wine Guys group, we are a wine identity, and we want to sell good and great and phenomenal wines. We don't want to sell things that are just okay because they want to spend less money. It's not acceptable in a restaurant.
Quality.
Exactly. It's quality.
Like that, the cut bagging for American wines and Italian. So they put a small section of very expensive U.S. wines on the bottom. So,
Great
it's
idea.
there.
It is there.
But,
you know, and that's the thing. It's an identity. Our identity is changing, and it's a much slower change than palate is because I have more inventory and a harder time selling it. But our identity here is New World Wine Guys. That's our identity. It is not France. It is not Germany. It is not Spain. It's not Italy. It is New World.
Has anyone tried transplanting vines?
Yes, they do it all the time. Oh yeah, most of California is all transplanted vines. Now, nowadays they're all hybrids. They've been genetically engineered, re-engineered, and they're hybridly grown. But for the climate and also just for different funguses and different diseases and pests that can live in different regions of the world. They also are doing it for mass producing. I mean, as an example, Pinot Noir, even though it's still grown everywhere, there is a clone of Pinot Noir that's almost exactly the same. You can never tell the difference. However, it produces twice as many grapes. So they can limit the amount of grapes that they can prune more, and they can get a higher concentration of flavor in what they do grow and not cut back on their yield. And that happens a lot.
What about ice wines?
Ice wines? Ice wines are a great thing. We can actually make ice wine here. Ice wines, you have to be in a northern big climate for. Does anyone kind of know how an ice wine works?
Isn't it like after like the frost? That's when you have to wait a certain amount of time. Like something about like the sugar and.
Yeah. Ice wine is basically a white grape. Traditionally, it's most often a Riesling, a Pinot Gris, or like a champagne grape. And what they'll do is they will take care of them, they'll prune them just like you normally would, and then at harvest season they let them sit on the vine. And then after harvest season is over, they continue to let them stay on the vine, and they wait until the first frost of the year. And the first frost will go and they'll coat all of the vines in the area, and they will freeze, they'll literally freeze the grapes on the vine.
Oh, snap frost.
It is snap frosting. And so what happens is the frosting shrivels the grape and condenses all the sugars in the grape. And so what you're losing is you're losing all the extra waters, it's concentrating all that sugar. So after the first frost, they'll go and they'll pick everything, and then they'll turn it into a regular wine, like you normally would. However, the sugar content is 5 to 10 times as much as a normal grape because of the process of exposing it to the frost. So what happens is you get these really crisp, super sweet dessert-style wines. They're always going to be light, they're airy, they're refreshing, surprisingly a lot of the time, but they are still a dessert wine. They are designed to be drank in no more than 1 or 2 ounce portions at a time with the dessert. They are a food wine, they're not or a sipping wine, and they are great. We've sold a couple here at wine dinners. They're really popular. People like them.
Is it quite expensive?
Yeah. Oh yes, because you lose a lot of product when you let your vines get frosted. You know, you're talking a single acre producing, as an example, somewhere in the range of, you know, in this area, 2 to 3 hectoliters is 1 acre. You know, after ice wining, a single acre is lucky to produce a quarter of that hectoliters. I mean, it's just, there's very little product that can deal with it because you are literally sweating or removing the water from the grapes. There's less water to be able to use to make it. Any other questions? No? What time are we at? I'm at 3:19, so that gives us about 10 minutes to taste a couple wines, talk about them, and then be on our way. So, real quick, we got to go grab a couple of wines. Jesse, you want to help me? Like just enough to pour it so everyone's better.
Bye, Robin. Thank you again.
Thank you. Okay, so the first one we're going to taste is Chateau Fontaine Chardonnay. Now, Chateau Fontaine, I haven't mentioned at this point, is a L'Île-et-Vilaine Peninsula wine. And it's not something we've ever featured in the past, I don't believe. Alright, does everyone have a glass? Okay. So funny. So we've been talking about trends. So everyone, let's just start with what aromas, what smells, smell. Lemon, absolutely. Okay. I agree with that too. There's lots of that green apple to it. Do you smell any?
Smell like an earthy smell to it, but
It'd be grass, hay, or straw or something I was kind of thinking. Because if you think about it, do you smell green grass like lawn, or do you smell dry grass? Dry. Do you smell any minerality to it? Like, when I think of minerality, have you ever been on a sidewalk or out on the road or just walking after a fresh rainstorm and you get that kind of crispness? Is there any of that?
It reminds me of spring.
Alright, it's crisp. Would you guys say just by smelling it, it smells heavy or light? It smells very light. So let's go ahead and just taste it. You can either swallow if you're off duty, you can spit in here, you can dump the rest. I don't really care. There's not a lot of wine in it. So now, does everyone detect acid? Okay, so why do we have acid? Remember what I said was causing the acid? The acid's caused by our cool climates. It's really what's producing all that acid. It doesn't give enough time for the grapes to get fully ripened, so there's not as much sugar, so therefore there's going to be more acid to tartan the drink. Do you still get your apple, your lemon flavors? Apple skins? So tight, constricted, which means that it's young. Those are all signs of a wine that can open up with time. It's not there yet. I'm not saying this is bad, by the way. I like it. But it is a crisp, dry, white table wine. It needs 10 more years to open up, and it'll be a nice, refreshing Chardonnay. It needs at least 10 more years, in my opinion. And anyone kind of see how it almost has like a, as I'm tasting it, when I taste it, like a green, like you were saying green apple, but not even green apple, but kind of like a, anyone ever eaten a leaf? Get that kind of flavor of chlorophyll? It's kind of that greeny element at the very end. It's kind of sitting on your tongue now that you're done. It needs a few more years to mature. Not bad though. And the grapes need these years to mature, not the bottle wine. 2 more years, they'll still have those flavors.
Oh, a question that I did have that you have gone over. So
Yeah.
does the color of the wine bottle affect it like beer?
No. Wine doesn't have the same acids and yeast system that beer does. And the skunking agent that you're talking about is present in any alcoholic substance. However, in wine, it's not as noticeable, nor is it as hard to control. You have to have a lot of sun exposure. Sun exposure will destroy wine as easily as it will destroy beer. However, can anyone tell me what a destroyed wine tastes like if it has a lot of sun exposure? Anyone tasted a wine that's been sitting out in the sun? Has anyone bought a bottle of wine from Scooby's that's sitting up by the sunlight there with direct sunlight on it? Okay, this is what happens. When you drink a wine that has a lot of sun exposure, it turns to alcohol. It doesn't get the skunky flavor, it just turns alcoholic. It literally tastes like someone took a shot of vodka and dumped it into your wine glass. It's disgusting. It just, it's not that the alcohol content grows necessarily, it's that you taste the alcohol more. You're losing your sugars, you're losing your fruit flavors, and it's focusing and it's cooking the wine, literally. So you think about a wine that you put into a saute pan and you cook it and you're reducing out the alcohol. Well, unfortunately, because the bottle has a cap on it, there's nowhere for the alcohol to go but in the bottle. So it just concentrates the alcohol flavor. It's a horrible, horrible thing. Anytime you ever go into a restaurant and you see wine sitting up in a window, don't order wine. Order the white wine that you know is in the cooler. Don't order the rest. Safe rule of thumb. So the next one we're tasting, this is Black Star Farms Riesling. This is our Arturos label. This is a semi-dry. This is our feature. This is actually the very end of the feature though. So this is listed as a medium dry, which means it's going to have some residual sugar. Not a ton, but a little bit. So just like the last one, this is going to have more aromatics to it. You're probably going to notice the fact that you're smelling, not necessarily more complexity, but just more smells. It's more pungent. You can smell it from farther away. In fact, if you were to do what's called the chest, chin, nose, you put it here, you probably smell it here before you even take it to your chin or chin. You have to put it in your nose in the glass to be able to smell this one. Chardonnay won't do that. It's not as aromatic. Green apple is probably another flavor that you're getting.
Yeah, it almost smells like
Like what?
Different apple smells.
Tell me.
Like an unripe pear.
Like an unripe pear. That's a good description, actually.
Yeah.
Or like, think of like a Granny Smith apple that has been peeled
Yeah.
and has sat out for maybe 5 minutes. Not necessarily on a wet
So it's a
stove.
bit brown.
Well, that's not necessarily browned as much as it's just not as crisp as the Chardonnay. There's a reason for this too, actually. The reason is because this particular grape has been aged longer. The vines are older than the Chardonnay that the last one that we just tasted. So it's had more time of maturity. Not a lot, but it is noticeable. That's why you're getting some of those flavors. This is also made in a different style. You know, the Chardonnay is meant to be dry and crisp. This is meant to be slightly sweet, which means that they're going to halt the fermentation process a little bit earlier. So, it's sweet, isn't it?
It's really good.
Very sweet. Now, would you say it's sweet with acid or sweet without acid? So, are you getting any feeling here? Is anyone getting any feeling here with like acid and tartness?
Tartness, like
Yeah, it's tart. Tart is acid. So there is acid to counter it. That's what a semi-sweet should taste like. It should be sweet, absolutely. But it also should be tart to help balance all those sugars so that you're not getting so much sweet that you just feel like you got this, Kool-Aid. That's exactly what it is. It's semi-sweet, by rule. And that's the goal behind a semi-sweet one. That makes sense, right? Okay, so moving along, this is the last one I have. I didn't even realize that this was open, by the way. I'm kind of curious who opened it. My nose isn't working very well. Okay, so this last one is Bry's Estate. This is listed as just a Riesling. It's not listed as a dry, a sweet, semi-sweet, just Riesling. Okay? The Bry's Estate. B-R-Y. They do this mostly because they only have one Riesling, so they don't need to bother with the classification from one to the other. They also do it because they have one style, and Bry always makes the same style consistently every year. Their style is technically a semi-sweet, however, there's more residual sugar than the last one we just tasted. And there's also less acid, which means it's going to taste a little bit different. You're also going to get different aromas from the smell. Lemon, yep, that's a different aroma from the last one. The funk. The funk flavor that you guys are getting, by the way, is the fact that this bottle's been open. That's what you're saying. No, it's not supposed to be there. It is taint. It is taint. It's a little bit old. It really smells to me like the bottle of wine was opened a little while ago, got shoved into a corner of it. I'm going to guess just by tasting that this wine's probably about 5 days old. 4 to 5 days.
So, like, what would you say is the maximum? I mean, like, how many days is it?
Depends on the wine. This has a lot of sugar. This actually could probably last another 4 or 5 days and be fine, just because of its sugar and the fact that we're storing it in cooling. And as long as it's not too oxidized. So if we were to pump this right now, put it back in the cooler, it's going to have another 2 or 3 days. If we don't pump it, I leave it out, it's got maybe 2 or 3 more hours.
Really?
Yeah.
I tried to pump it.
Well, this one wasn't pumped, but I'm just saying, if we weren't to go and store it and properly take care of it, it's only got a couple hours of life. If we were to store it, it might even have 1 or 2 days. Absolutely. You guys are already noticing slight variations on the smell right now. And it's nothing offensive yet. It's nothing really bad. It's just slightly there. And if you weren't looking for it, like you guys are right now, you probably wouldn't even notice those effects. However, like I said, it's close. And part of the reason it's close is because it wasn't properly stored. And it probably hasn't done that long enough. So it's probably something I'm not going to sell as an example.
You should probably just talk about it right now.
Well, if you're not working, you're welcome to take it home with you. I'm not seriously, because it is worthless to me. Yes and no. All white wines should be served colder than reds. However, white wines don't need to be chilled to the level that we chill them here. A proper chilled temperature for a white wine is about 45 degrees, which is a light level of refrigeration, but it really shouldn't be too much. Most coolers are kept at around 38, which means that they're too cold. It's like 34 to 35, which means that this wine, really, to be properly enjoyed, should sit in your glass for about 5 minutes before you were to drink it. It would still be cool, but it wouldn't be ice cold. People that want ice cold drink are just like people that want ice cold beer. They don't want to taste the wine. The colder it is, the less flavors there are, the less enjoyment you're going to get out of it from an aromatic. However, if you don't want to taste anything, put ice cubes in it. You want to taste crap.
Now, the other side of the question, are there any reds that are chilled?
Yes. Very few are recommended to be chilled. Most of the chilled wines are...
Some people like Merlot show.
No, most of the wines that are supposed to be chilled are like single-year pressings. As an example, a wine that you're familiar with that is a single-year pressing is Beaujolais de Bell. That is bottled, produced, and sold in the same year, and it's supposed to be drank within a year because it just gets worse with age. There are other versions, not Beaujolais, by the way, but other red wines like that are encouraged to be refrigerated and served cool at about the same temperature as white wine, about 45 degrees. Part of the reason that is it just doesn't hold up very long, and we're wanting more tart-styled flavors. Another one that is a red wine that people want to have chilled all the time is rosé. Yeah, because it is, for all purposes, rosé is really white wine from a red grape, which means that you're getting all those red wine flavors, but it still has the crispness and the acidity of a white wine.
Isn't it that they just dropped the peel of the grapes in the short amount of time?
Basically. They're dying
So
very
we
short.
didn't get into a taste test.
Well, the reason we're not getting into taste is because we were talking about gamey. People already said lemon. I heard someone mention apple, banana chips, and it's
no acid to it.
sweet, and there's low acid. That's the difference between semi-dry and dried styles. Rye doesn't like a lot of acid in their wine, so they're usually very smooth and traditionally sweet. I haven't had a non-sweet wine from Bryce State yet. Alright, now this is the only red that we have open right now, other than Fen Valley, which you probably have tasted before. Again, you can just tell by looking at it that it's light colored. This is the Gamay Noir.
Thank you.
By whom?
What did you say? You probably know?
By
Oh,
whom?
light colored.
It almost looks like
So
Okay.
there's two reasons for this. One, what's the biggest reason why it's light colored? Ashley, why is it light colored?
This?
No, this red wine that I'm pouring.
That's, what is it?
Gamay Noir.
Gamay?
No?
Chateau Grand Traverse.
Is it because they, yeah, that's right.
No, the biggest reason it's a light colored
I've
grape.
never had a Gamay before.
The biggest reason Gamay Noir, or this red wine, is light color is because Gamay Noir is like Pinot Noir. It's a very light grape. It's thin skinned, so there's not a lot of skin exposure for it to be heavy.
Even though Noir means rye.
Yeah, but Pinot Noir, Pinot means. No, we're not talking about Pinot. We're talking about Gamay Noir. Okay, the other reason it's light is because of the soil. Michigan does produce lighter wine, but it's a very, very thin-skinned grape, which means it's going to be light no matter where you grow. Peppery, absolutely.
Smells like eggnog.
Baking spice, right? Nutmeg, cinnamon, baking spices. Very predominant on there. Fruit flavors are plum, cherry, raspberry, kind of depending on
White pepper.
very jammy, right?
The smell of this anyway, it should go good with it. It's very like a vanilla kind of dessert.
It also could go pretty good with holiday style foods for the most part. It's a nice wine. It's a little more unique. That's Gamay. Gamay always brings forth lots of spices.
Gamay.
Gamay means Gamay. It's the name of the grape. It's like Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon.
Pinot's the grape.
Yeah, Pinot Noir is the grape. This is Gamay Noir. That is literally the name of the grape. Gamay Noir.
The white pepper you get in there.
This is all grape. It's not. This is all the grape that is imparting the smoke. This is what Gamay Noir is able to impart. It just has a lot of spice and smoke in the grape skin. There is some oak aging, but that's not responsible for all the flavors.
You don't.
That's really great.
Real venison stuff.
It's good. It's again, it's a very light.
You say venison.
And if you taste this and you let it sit in your mouth, again, you're going to get, just like the Chardonnay at the end, a slight hint of greenness or young or just a lack of follow through. It follows and it's short. The only flavors I really get as I continue to drink this or continue to let it sit in my mouth is spice. And then the spice disappears and there's nothing to follow up with it. That is, again, a symbol or an indication that the wine is young and that with age and maturity, it'll become a great wine. It's going to take a few years for the grapes to get old enough for that to happen. However, for 2008 and for only being 20 years old, they're pretty good as they are already. And so just think of this like a young person. It is good. It's really nice. And that's basically all I'm going to do. That's the end of the lecture.